Welcome, listener, to Round the Table, the monthly podcast where we discuss everything to do with tabletop role-playing games and other gaming topics. Today I'll ponder the question with this great panel of game devs: do leftist politics belong in tabletop role-playing games? I'm your host, Syzer, he, him, and now we'll meet the rest of our panel. When I call on you, go ahead and give your name, your pronouns, and your answer to the question of whether leftist politics have a place in today's TTRPG landscape. So, Wythe.
Hey, I'm Wythe Marshall, he, him, and the answer is hell yes.
All right, Rafi.
Hi, I'm Rafi from Reverie Rebels, they, them pronouns. I'm going to follow up with that with a fuck yeah.
All right, and Fede.
I'm Fede from Arcana Media. Pronouns are they, she, and the answer is duh. I hope so.
All right,
so yeah, I guess.
So we have 3 yeses, and with that, the matter is settled. Thank you for watching Round the Table. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. JK! All right, sorry for the clickbait, friends, and I hope you'll forgive us this little ruse. Just consider it a bit of amuse-bouche, an appetizer for the more in-depth conversation that we're about to have. So, you know, obviously we're all on the left side of the political spectrum, so just expect that going into this here, okay, folks? So let's get into it. It might be helpful to the listener if we can all sort of explain where we stand politically. I mean, you don't have to use labels or anything, but if you could just more or less convey what your important stances on the issues of the day are, that might be useful to the people who are listening to us today. So let's go in the reverse order. Fede, what do you think? Or where are you at?
Okay, so I don't think I've ever gone by any particular labels as of up until maybe a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. I had a very weird, I guess, political history in terms of thought, but I think mostly because of the issues that sort of preoccupy me. I'm basically going to say that I'm probably an anarcho-eco-feminist. Sort of leave it at that. I can elaborate later, but yeah,
gotcha.
Those are sort of the issues that I'm more worried about.
Gotcha. And what are the issues that you would say would be your top few, top 3, top 5, or? I mean, obviously the environment, right?
It's always the one that's been constant throughout my life is climate change or global warming, if you prefer to. And then, of course, with regards to the causes and sort of the social trends or the movements that more sort of inspire me to talk about that issue. Lately, it's been dark ecology, and feminism is super important historically, and anarchism too, because I have a very non-Western take on anarchism. I've not read people like Malatesta. I've read very little of Bakunin or stuff like that. For me, anarchism is basically sort of taken more from an anthropologist sort of POV of studying societies that have lived outside of state, and also reaching some sort of definition of statism, of a particular sort of process by which life and everything that surrounds us is sort of diminished or simplified in such a way that it impoverishes everything that surrounds us in our lives. And that's kind of the take that I have on anarchism. I don't really subscribe to a lot of stuff that the main names in anarchism used to subscribe to. If you read very old anarchist figures, a lot of them talked about, like, for example, the way technology was going to move us forward from, the state of things. And I don't think that's really something that's very in vogue in leftist circles nowadays. But yeah, it's that kind of thing.
Okay.
And feminism, because in Argentina, like, feminism is very big, and I started getting very much into reading feminist authors when I moved to Japan. I had a very weird kind of thing where I was like, okay, I'm moving to a new country, and I think that like social issues in Japan, like the most important ones are basically gender disparity and work culture. There was a lot of documentation online and stuff that you could read about work culture in Japan, but not so much about gender disparity. And so I had to actually go to books to learn about that when we moved there. So yeah, those are sort of like the prongs that I.
Yeah, I think both of those things are sort of famously problems in Japan, but the work culture thing gets a lot more bandwidth in the discourse. Okay, Rafi, how about you?
I think I also don't have necessarily a established label, but I love being called a radical. Like, every time someone is like, "You're such a freaking radical," I'm like, I love it. So I think I identify as like the end of the spectrum radical, but I haven't found like a philosophy or even, systems that I'm like totally down for. And I'm not sure if having one system that we all kind of like agree on is also like the best solution for the world. I think, like, personally, I'm like, if it's a structure that's community driven, if it's a structure that is to like better the world and uplift people, if it's a structure that it's flatter, and if it's a structure that feels equitable, then I don't care what you call it. I don't care if there are, little bits here that does different things here and different things there. I think each, perhaps, culture and part of the world are gonna require different things, right? Because we are complex and we are diverse and all of that. So I just haven't found that for myself. But I support anything that has those principles in them. And I think I've come to this perspective because since I can remember, I've identified as queer, and I came out very young, like super young, and just like navigating the world through that queerness and like weirdness and not fitting in, navigating the world as a biracial Arab person. Those things are like very constant, like 24/7 on me. So I think that really like radically informed how I've seen the world, and just be like, well, like things don't just fit like that. Like, one big thing can't work for everybody. So yeah, that's just kind of where I come from.
What it sounds like is you're sort of advocating for like local democratic control to some extent.
I think so. I love the idea of like micro things instead of like one big thing to rule them all. Although I love Lord of the Rings, but I think I'm not sure if as human beings we can do that.
Yeah, well, that's that. The one size fits all thing is kind of hard to prescribe. All right, Wythe, how about you?
I mean, maybe to take a some more controversial point. I mean, I'd say I'm an orthodox Marxist, in the tradition of Marx, Lenin, Mao, and also all the feminist Marxists like Sylvia Federici and others, who've added, and especially Frantz Fanon and the sort of decolonial school of thinking around, okay, how do you do socialism in the context of a world that's been very, very contoured by specifically racialized colonial capitalism, not just any old market economy. So I think that level of analysis, I think it is interesting to think of it because the end goal is, I think, the same as a lot of the more anarchistic way of saying there should be local democratic councils, but it's kind of a question of how do you get there and what does that process look like? And I think it's interesting. Like I'm still checking out, but like Hell World by Phil Neal is a new book that's really good that looks at we're kind of already in the apocalypse, right? I think that's a key learning. Like I'm an anthropologist and sci-fi person by training, and to me that's like the other big influence. So I'd say like orthodox Marxism and critical theory, and then especially the focus on race. That's like stuff that I'm interested in, separate from sci-fi, and then in sci-fi, really like feminist sci-fi and sci-fi that's looking at apocalypse and living in apocalypse, and how that condition is very uneven and across the world always already, because of especially colonial encounters, and uneven access to technologies and means of production. So I think those lenses are really useful. And I think as a science, Marxism is a kind of good solution in general because it actually does prescribe local analysis. So it prescribes local communities to do the local analysis. And again, Mao is really specific about that. Fanon's really specific about that there isn't some sort of imported German English version that you can just take anywhere. You'd have to develop it locally every time. Like that's the strength, right? And in the Caribbean, you see authors do that. You see it everywhere. But I do think, what does that mean? You can analyze something locally, but is the solution then a different solution in every place? Or is there some way that people can link up internationally and help each other? And I think that's where a lot of the left has just struggled, frankly. One of the cool things I will say is with making games, it's been really rad with the era of Discord and COVID to connect with people all over and have more of these conversations and learn more in the context of like fun having, but then we get to talk seriously sometimes too. So I'm a big fan of, some of the OG analytics, but in terms of what it all means, I think this will be a good discussion to kind of hear, some different local takes,
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all three for insight into kind of your general thought processes. So let's bring TTRPGs or just games in general into this discussion. So what are your games, and how do your political views influence how you make them? And I'll just toss this out to whoever would like to take it. Does anybody have thoughts they'd like to just jump in with here real quick? Or, opportunity to tell people about the stuff you make.
Yeah, I think for me at least, the main thing that's driven a lot of like the political insights on like design and stuff like that has been sort of like the experience of migration. Because I had to move from Argentina. It's impossible to live off of TTRPGs here. And I moved to the UK. I was able to live there and do TTRPGs for a while until it became untenable. Then I moved to Japan and eventually I came back. So that constant moving stuff, the experience of like, uprootedness, the issues about identity that sort of like led into my games afterwards. And also like the integration into different migrant communities and seeing the migrant experience in general, which we had in common. Were so like big part of like what would influence, I guess, my games eventually. All of my games have had generally like some sort of like struggle with identity. Insofar as I can say that's always been like a theme. Identity, of course, defined under different rubrics, depending on whatever it was that I wanted to talk at the time, but identity at the end of the day. That's kind of it. And I did realize that I sort of like, because of my influences being mostly from like social sciences and stuff like that I was doing first unconsciously and then more like consciously, sort of like what we call, I don't know how you say it in English, but it's like divulgación. It's like when you're out there trying to, spread ideas that someone else has, come up with through the social sciences, spread them through gaming. And
I'm not sure we do have a word for that, but I think we get what you're trying to say.
Like political education, maybe something along those lines.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's the difference between, I don't know, The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and an essay on chucking something that's big that I've read lately. Like, for example, there's this book that's come out that's called Paleopathology at the Origin of Agriculture. It's not like a particularly accessible book. It's more like a thing that's designed for academics. But the difference between that and stuff like The Dawn of Everything, which is like a book that anyone can access, and you can see adverse to like the London Underground shit. That sort of like differential. That's kind of like what I wanted to do with games. Yeah.
And yeah, Fede, like when we were first talking, just discussing things, I asked you what your influences were, and you didn't list a single game. You just listed philosophers, which is great. I think you can get that. You can obviously get inspiration for your games from just about anything or anywhere. But I was just surprised by it.
It's a political thing also, that being a political issue. I think that's, just to bring it more into like the more conventional TTRPG talk. Like, I think a friend put it very succinctly, TTRPGs as we know them, at least, are sort of like a child of neoliberal world, the neoliberal world. And so much of our collective imagination about what a TTRPG is and how it should look like is a sort of like retread, or to use a kind of ugly way, sort of like word, a regurgitation of what has been done before. So I really wanted to break from that, because I was like, I don't want to do the same shit that everyone's doing. And a really good way of doing that is just to like not draw from that sort of like self kind of like just like retread influences. So
I think Fede, I really admire your work for the innovation, and I think we've tried to do some similar things within a much more constrained, like it's still adventure gaming, especially starting out really focused in sci-fi adventure gaming, but like politically and just philosophically, I'm reading like Cyclonopedia is a big influence, or anything by Deleuze, or like in terms of history, like Gerald Horne's work, which in terms of popular political education is really, really badass. Like, how do you write a book that is academic, but I could give to any of my cousins to just read as a fun book, like The Counter-Revolution of 1776. And so I wanted to make a game like that. It was truly fun, but had these other thoughts in mind that were like not Lord of the Rings. You know what I mean? So not like, yay, there's one Picaresque hero who defeats ultimate evil, as if there's this, you know what I mean? These very dichotomous, like there's just a bad guy, a bad actor, and if you get rid of them, everything else is fine. The kings are fine, actually, and I kind of hated that. And so when it came to making games, I feel like in terms of inspiration, it's like, I would not say my inspirations are Dungeons and Dragons, even though I played a lot of it as a kid. It's more like weird things I'm reading. And then, okay, how do I make a game that has the contours of an adventure game, an Avatar, you roll dice, you do stuff that's difficult in the world. But then socially, how do you make a situation that's more in line with critiques of capitalism and, messed up things about labor, things I'm like worried about daily. So for me, that was still Fleet. It was like, let's make a game in space that's, it came out around the same time as Mothership, but it's this idea of you're working for a company in space, but the company is the bad guy, and making that the narrative structure was an aha moment that instantly clicked with players. Like, everyone got it. And so I felt like that was the political gesture, was to find a narrative structure that forces players to have some sort of feeling. So it's not mechanicalized. There's no like score in terms of resistance. The resistance is an organic narrative thing, but then there's typical adventure gaming mechanicalization of like your powers and the things you do out in world, but how you choose to view the political is something you must confront, but it is undefined on purpose. So that was a gesture that I think for that game especially did work really well. And since then we've gone on, my friends and I have worked on that to make some other games, and we've basically sought out other narrative structures that are appropriate to other situations. So like with climate disruption, which is like the other big thing. So Fede, I'm glad you mentioned that also like motivates me to do art at all. My friend had a game about weird animals in a world where humans have all died for some mysterious reason. And we decided to make it really kid-friendly, no cuss words, and we never mention climate disruption. We just say all the humans died for some reason, and there's too much stuff, and the world is polluted. And so very clearly, we're making all the links, but we're letting a kid fill that in as they're looking on TikTok and Instagram and hopefully reading, and so they can put climate disruption information next to our game and it works together. But we decided to make that game more indirect in terms of political education to try to capture a broader audience and a younger audience. And the narrative structure more like Mouse Ritter, where you're just little guys trying to survive, right? So it's less kind of like you're doing politics. But what it is all the little animals have to figure out how to work together, or do they work together? Do they fight each other? And so it is, again, recreating politics, but it feels more like an anarchist, community type game, collective type approach, as opposed to Stillfleet, which is very much about, a job in a company. And so it's been fun to kind of try to really think about that narrative structure. What are the players doing? And that's for me how I've approached it in terms of like, where does the politics come in? It comes in at that level. So that's me.
Yeah, all great things. Well, I only have one game out, so this is my first game. But the biggest motivator and influence for Echoes the Veil for me was I wanted to make it explicitly political. And the inspiration was on the ground activism, because that's my background. So I have like over 20 years of organizing different groups, different social justice issues, LGBTQ, immigration, Black Lives Matter, disability rights, indigenous rights. So throughout, 20 plus years, I've done several types of engagement when it comes to really on the ground activism, direct action, things that really puts your body on the line. So I wanted to translate that into the game and kind of make the explicit link that the person was political. There's no way to play this game rather than being political about it. And if that's not a game for you, that's fine. That's cool. You can go play other things. And the second motivator was just to piss white men off. It's truly, that's always a big motivation for me. It's just like people that co-opt genres, like my game is Cyberpunk. So folks that co-opt the cyberpunk genre or any genre and then just like whitewash it and make it all about, like White said, just if you take out this one big evil thing, then everything just falls into place, right? And all the heroes and binary and all of those things that are really not real in real life. So disrupting that and just kind of carving your own space and reframing it back to its roots, I think it's really a big motivator for me.
Cool. I realized I didn't actually answer my own question earlier, so let me do that real quick. Which is, and I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk a little bit about influence on Skies of Fortune. But I would, I'm not booked up like a lot of leftists are. I'm not a very good academic. But I would probably call myself like a libertarian socialist. So if we're looking at the political compass, lower right portion of it, and I'm basically for anything that makes the lives of marginalized and working class people better. So that's kind of where I'm at. Whether that's reform, whether that's revolution, I'm kind of there for it. But that just gives, I'm probably not too far off from a lot of people in my generation, how they feel about their government and the way we ought to sort of change the way we do politics. Anyway, Skies of Fortune, which the current game that I'm working on is, it's the Sky Pirate game. I set out to make it because I wanted, not because I wanted to make a statement or anything, although there's nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to make a game that I enjoyed playing, and then everything else sort of came in after that. And what I realized pretty quickly was that in a setup that is like the Golden Age of piracy, the villain is going to be the entrenched power structure, right? The aristocrats, the merchant marine, the colonialists. I'm like, okay, this is pretty easy to make some anti-colonialist hay with. So that's kind of what we've done. We've done our best to make it a fun game that you can also has a message about questioning power structures, and also maybe punching a Marine captain in the face. I know that's it's fun, right? So it's a little bit different because like I didn't think about about bringing in my personal belief system when I started making the game. It just happily sort of got there on its own. So I guess maybe we could ask the question of how intentional are you with your political messaging in your games? I mean, we talked a little bit about political education already, so that's definitely there. But it sounds like everybody here is pretty intentional with how they go about putting out their message into their games, right? And I'm of the opinion that there pretty much is no non-political speech, right? Would everyone agree with that, more or less? Yeah. So it's going to get in there one way or another. So I guess you might as well just do what feels right to you. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this. Are there any trends in TTRPG design like these days or in the past that you find regressive, and is in your work in some way a reaction to those trends?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, most of it is to me, unfortunately, and it's kind of like an offshoot of that thing, the fact that the art form as we know it has been conceived in like a neoliberal world by a guy who quoted Confederate soldiers in public forums.
Yeah.
On matters of morals.
Yeah.
And so like what you were saying just now in terms of like the influences and being conscious about stuff and being intentional. I think that a big part of what makes what involves the work of being intentional about your politics is sort of like becoming conscious or becoming aware of how much that sort of like right-wing framing of the world and our history and our being as species is baked into the sun. When I go to any publisher and you see the blueprint for a basic sort of like game where like you're going to have a bestiary. Okay, so you're going to have a catalog of acceptable targets, and they're all going to be simplified with bits of data that codify the way in which you're going to kill them. Everything that is not about that, it's not going to be codified, or it's going to be hazy or blurry or something like that. How do you even want to have such a thing in your game if you're going to have a way of depicting non-humans or people that are different at a species level than the people that you're going to play as? How are you going to depict them? Are you going to make them fundamentally and mechanically the same as your own to sort of like create a sort of like bridging thing where you're like, okay, no, we're not fundamentally different from these people? Those sort of like questions and that sort of like process of like questioning the material, the building blocks upon which you're supposed to make a game. That's largely the work that happens at the beginning, I think, when you're starting to be like, hey, I want to be intentional about my politics in the games. And afterwards comes the job of like translating your own politics into like, okay, so this is how I do a game that is about the experience of not being a human and the perception of like being man. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Rafi, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said. Absolutely, I was just like snapping here invisibly, but I kind of hinted at that a little bit when I talked about the cyberpunk genre, which I think okay, like I think there's a difference between being explicitly political about a game and then just saying, you're gonna go fight off the corporations because the corporations suck and they are the enemy, which to me is like the vast majority of like cyberpunk games that are out there. Is kind of like that, right? And that's fine, but I wouldn't call that political. I think it would be political if there were like guardrails and explanations that like tie those things together. Like, okay, why is the corporation evil? Why, because then it just becomes kind of like a fantasy reenactment for apolitical people, where it's like fun to like punch a cop in the face, but like they don't know like the roots of that. Like what does it mean to be like part of an authoritative system that has done fucked up shit for like centuries and centuries, right? Are you just glad to punch a cop because it's a combat scene and it's cool, or does that spark something else in you? And I think that difference is very, very important to have. For example, I mentioned some of the guardrails, like, okay, you can't play as a corporation, you can't play as a faction from the evil corp, or you can't play as a cop, or augmentations exist not to be used as a way to like fix disabled people's disabilities. Like, I've been on tables with a lot of people that, use augs to like fix the fact that in their backstory it was like, my character was blind and then now I can see, or now I can walk, and like all those things. And it becomes a little bit problematic when it's just those things are there and there isn't like explanation or guidance about why those things are there and how to like interact with them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really like that note about what you're doing as a game designer, and that is part of the intention. And I think there's intention at a high level, the concept, and then there's also in the execution throughout. Like you might have to add features or whatever, however you want to think about it, text that says this is why this is why the rule is written the way it is, or can you make that into the rule so it's very obvious? What those are things you can actually play test, and I don't know if people are used to that, but you can play test political situations, because I agree with you. There are games that have power fantasies of defeating bad guys, but it kind of reduces to Sauron, to the ultimate evil, the one bad actor. And so if you really wanted to make it not just that is a company that is bad, but the structure is bad, and we must think or create a parallel structure. Okay, how would that work? You have to build something. You have to generate something. And so I think you have to come up with narrative structures at some level in your game that are about building community or trying to duopolitics differently. And that requires almost then making explicit, okay, what are the base politics of this game? And as you say, it could be, pirates, right? It could be anything. I mean, they almost all of these systems, it's funny, they devolve into like, there's a liberal market economy. You spend gold and you get stuff, and you want to get more stuff and get more gold. And so it's very easy to fall into that trap. And it's actually, I think, hard if you've played a lot of D&D style games or traditional cyberpunk games or whatever, to like work backward and be like, how do I make a narrative that doesn't do that? And again, I think of like Fede, I think your game's pushed the limit more than mine in terms of like, you have games where their economy is totally different. The economy is about colors, like emotions in rings. It's very different than like in Still Fleet, there's money, but it's kind of a joke. Like it doesn't, it's company script. So I think to that question of intentionality, to me, a lot of it comes in for us at the level of narrative design. What are the players going to do? But I completely agree with Rafi that there's also a following up at each level when you introduce, and as Fede, you said about like monsters or bad guys, when you introduce those, are they all just non-humans? Are they others? How is that like very, very tropey, like back to D&D, pretty thinly veiled, like racialized bad guy category cropping up again and again throughout genres? And what could we do differently to not just reproduce that? So I think there's intentionality sort of at every level, and it depends how much you want to make your game about that intentionality versus you're doing it as a kind of reflex. And I think both are fine. Like you said, not all games need to be like, this is a political game, but it is going to be political in a sense either way. So you don't have to say it's a political game, but you probably want to think through, have I just made a bestiary full of thinly veiled racialized tropes from Lord of the Rings, and like, why did I do that? Oops. And maybe, is there something better? So I think it's also about, frankly, challenging yourself to do better. I'm going to throw that gauntlet down. I don't think anyone will disagree, but on this call.
No. I think there's another thing that is good to sort of like think about the way in which we frame the fictions in TTRPGs. Like, largely what we've been mechanized since the start of the art form is combat, or I'd like to call it violence more than combat, because I feel that there's been sort of like a transition from the more ritualized process of what combat means to straight up violence. But I think that when we talk about like politicizing games and showcasing the exercise of politics in games, there is an issue whereby like we only mechanize combat, and in real life, I'm not going to go and like, I don't know, punch someone in the face or something like that. Most people can't do that or can't afford to do that, and the way we practice politics day to day is, cooking for a fellow person that might need that, or doing errands for someone, or like, for example, gathering stuff that people don't need and just redistributing that to people that do need. I think there's an issue whereby we've created this sort of like collective imaginarium about the idea that the only thing that is fun to mechanize is combat. And I think that there's a huge issue at that. And I think we need to be able to find the way to make mechanics and systems whereby we mechanically create engaging identities through the mechanization of stuff like cooking for someone, or doing deliveries for someone, or doing stuff that's like part of the big care network that enables for some people to then maybe do violence or punch a cop or something like that. A big part of like the revolutionary process, I'm pretty sure Rafi's like super familiarized with this, has to do with feeding people and stuff like that. And for us to not be able to conceive how to make that fun in the context of the game, I think it's a huge issue. I think it's one of the biggest design goals that people that want to sort of like develop or transmit a certain degree of political consciousness to games. It's a thing that like I've spoken with friends that share the same politics than me, but that simultaneously didn't seem to find it easy to imagine how cooking could be an interesting part or a fun mechanic, or developed to the same complexity that combat could be developed. And I find it very strange that we would coincide in terms of political belief, but at the same time, they didn't think that would be possible design-wise.
Yeah,
and I think that's a huge
Steelman,
issue.
like, I think their argument is it doesn't have the same stakes, because if I cook something and make you a banh mi sandwich and you don't like it, you're probably not going to die, and I'm probably not going to die. Whereas if a zombie's attacking me, so I think it's the question of stakes, and people, when they go for catharsis and they're used to playing video games and watching action movies or whatever they're used to doing, they want the sort of instant stakes. And I think, to your point, I completely agree with everything you said. I think it's a question of a design challenge of like, how do you make that interaction of caring for someone have a human moment where there's something in tension, there's something that could go different ways, and what is the fun there? And I completely agree, it could be equally fun or more fun than just killing goblins and zombies in quotation marks over and over again. But I think it's almost easier if you've played a lot of video games, you play D&D, to mechanicalize the killing as the stakes, the life and death, versus what is my community building toward? Which is, in real life, to your point, that's actually, I don't fight a lot of zombies in my day-to-day life. Funny enough, I don't know if you guys do.
Yeah.
But I do worry about people who are unhoused or not, they don't have food security in my block. You know what I mean? Like, that's actually much more, it is higher stakes because it's real. So some of it's maybe just tapping your alley. Sorry, I'm just thinking off what you said. It's a good.
No, like, to be honest, to just quickly, I think, so like bounce from that. I think that, yeah, there's an issue about like our capability of mechanizing states. I think part of that is that the way in which we would mechanize stakes when it comes to that would make stuff feel too real for people. Like violence is so like done in such a nonchalant way, and the way by which lives end through violence is so like meh at this point, that it doesn't really have the same punch as saying, okay, because you didn't feed this person or because you didn't care for this person, they're going to go back to an abusive house and they're going to be killed by their husband or whatever. It becomes something that for some reason has, you know, a much more serious tone. We're all talking about life's ending, but there's an aesthetic dimension whereby, you know, killing someone, being like a Nazi by punching them in the face is something that's very easy to just like portray. Whereas saving someone from dying at the hands of an abusive partner or something like that, it's not. And I think, you know, people need to have the ovaries or the balls to go in there and design for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this made me think of a Coyote and Crow game, one shot that I played actually, where the whole thing was about a big cookout and a big community cooking that we had to do in order to like feed the community to prepare folks from this like massive winter storm that was coming. So like that to me felt very high stakes because it was framed right in a particular way, in a particular decolonial way, of course, in a particular community oriented way where it was like, okay, shit, if we don't gather these ingredients and cook them properly, like hundreds of people are gonna get messed up in this community. We're not gonna be able to get stuff out because it's gonna be stormy outside. So it was like for me personally, I felt that stake, but I know that a friend of mine who wasn't into cooking had a really hard time because he was like, I don't even know, I don't cook, you know? And I'm like, I cook every day. So there's also kind of like that, you know, like it's so much easier to imagine a physical thing because it's not something that my friend or I are used to doing. We don't punch people around, and that feels a little bit more cathartic. But it was just interesting to notice how like I related to it, but he was just like having a really hard time to get into it.
It's like you've seen, I think it's just sort of bouncing off what Wythe said. You've seen it so much more on TV and movies, whereas you probably haven't, unless you watch the Cooking Channel or the Food Network or whatever, you probably don't know much about cooking at all, you know, or if you've never cooked. Well, I mean, unless you cook yourself, right? So it
does have the same stakes.
It does, yeah. It's much the media. Popular media has made it much easier to imagine violence than to imagine cooking. So I don't know. Maybe is that a profound statement? I don't know.
I also think that, and then sometimes you can use violence and push past to get back to cooking. Yeah. Like, and again, Fede, I'm thinking of some of your games being very far future. All three of us have sci-fi games, but in my experience, the games I run are pretty violent because they're about political violence in some way. They're popular education in the dumbest, like, okay, you're Link, you're fighting the bad moblins, but in this case, it's you know, you have to do politics because you're actually the bad guy, and you have to realize that. But in some ways, players, when they play enough, the violence does become kind of more boring than the like, what are we building? And I think that is hard to achieve. And I don't know that I have figured it out. I'm not saying this game is completely like perfect. I think it works, but it's like, and there's a level of buy-in. But even with people I barely know in real life, but I've played with a lot on Discord, you do get to a point where they're interested in like, oh, we have like nanotech. We can like 3D print food. Like, let's make some weird shit, you know? And I think that's actually a fun thing to try to figure out how to design for. Like, having people arrive at their own stakes that are not about fighting things. Maybe you give them some level of fighting. I've tried at least to get that out of the way, or get, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a meal, like that's part of a meal for many players, but it doesn't have to be the whole meal.
Right.
I agree with everything you were saying about like, why do we do so much violence? But I think so many players want it, right? That we have to kind of meet them somewhere, as opposed to saying there's no violence, right?
that's kind of the conclusion I've come to with Skies in some ways. That like while I've become more interested in not designing for a combat system, I think that is going to be the main draw for a lot of people who want like kind of a swashbuckling action adventure. So I'm thinking about it. Every day I'm coming up with more ways to consider the moral implications of the violence in the setting. But it's a draw. I'm hoping people will take something away from it after they do it, after they experience it. But it is kind of what a lot of gamers are looking for.
Yeah, no, I think there's something interesting with regards to stakes, because when we talk about stakes, we generally talk about like life and death. And I think that from a design perspective, you can redefine what life and death means. And as it's defined by the canon, it's usually defined well by biological life and death. Mm-hmm. But we don't talk, for example, about the idea of social death. And if you've read about like the history of slavery, for example, or the history of mass migration and especially refugee movements, social death is very present. The idea that you belong to a group, and when you're extracted from that group, you can essentially experience what is defined as social death. And I think one thing that I'm trying to do with the new version of Nibiru is to first of all work from an idea whereby there's no division between mind and body, so they're all the same. And so because of that, what you would normally call your biological hit points, the state of your body, is not differentiated with your state of mind. And so the same process by which you may, be wounded and lose a point of that and draw you closer to death, can also be a process in which, I don't know, like you're stopped at a border checkpoint and you're refused entry. And that hurts you because you see your friends, your found family go through a checkpoint and you're left out. And that can actually take you to zero and you experience social death and you're taken out of the game in the same way you would be taken out if you were actually killed. But you're basically outside of the story now, not because you experience biological death, but because you are taken out of your social context and experience social death. And I think breaking with some of the more hard-coded ideas about death being purely a biological process and life being purely a biological process, when it's actually, something that is completely rooted in your social group and stuff like that. I think it's important. I think there's plenty of ways whereby breaking those sort of like standards of how we see life and death and how we see the process that affect us in that way can actually lead to huge stakes in terms of like mechanics and drama, etc., that are not linked to physical violence.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say really quickly. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm talking a lot. I think that was such a good observation, Fede, and it made me think of something I just read like earlier today by Watt from Cloud Empress, who has a nice newsletter about games they develop. So Cloud Empress and Rustwing, and they were saying in Rustwing they wanted stakes to not be about life and death in the sense of hit points, and so they have like you take different consequences like delay in time or attention, negative social attention. And I think what you're talking about, bare life or social death, is another one. So you can imagine this is like a practical thought of like as a game designer, you have hit points as one axis, life and death for my body, but you also have the social death, cultural death, right? Death of a language. You also have things like negative attention from, and this is very cyberpunk, right? The heat mechanic. And I think there's other ways maybe to have stakes that get away from hit points. So I think you just brought up like a really good example, and there's maybe others out there as well.
Yeah, I'm certainly going to take that into consideration for the future. But I think this leads into another question that I had, which was, this is a little more, this is more of a devil's advocate kind of question, but here we go. What kind of effect do you think games have on players? And do you also, in kind of the implication of that question is, do you think you can influence an individual's moral development or worldview through gameplay?
I think it's inevitable.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I do this in other settings too. For example, dating apps. You go on the dating apps and then you put all your political stuff in there. Then you meet someone, you talk about your politics, you plant the seed, or like you go to supermarket, you talk to, like you do this I do this like everywhere, it's just like, and you plant the seeds. So, I mean, I would hope that, it's a little bit more than just like inspiration. Like, I think the cool thing about gaming is that embodied experience, like versus, just having a conversation with someone. I mean, those both things are great, but I think something about the embodiment, right? Like the body keeps score. Like we know how differently information and experiences are processed when you have that sort of like embodied experience. So I think the TTRPGs and like role-playing games gives you that opening into that type of processing in a way that can perhaps feel a little bit more successful, or I hope so. I don't have the data. I would love if there was some sort of like research on that we could just back these things up. But just like, empirical evidence with my tables, like, like my own personal experiences of seeing people just come out of their own shell, talk more about things that they weren't talking about before, or people that were like very put off about certain things come back, not talk so much. But I'm like, okay, you're coming back. Okay, something's clicking. I don't know what it is, So I think it's really cool to watch that progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't experienced that myself because I haven't put out a game, but it seems like about the most rewarding part of the process, right? Getting people to experience your stuff and getting like maybe I don't want to say incepting because that's a little bit like planting the seeds a better idea, right? Planting the seeds of an idea. Has anybody everyone experienced that? Yeah.
Just having a conversation, like to what I think, Rafi, you're saying, it's like the way you would normally have a conversation with anyone anywhere. It's not different when you're playing a game. It's just that in my experience, in my setting, my social milieu, it's less likely I'm going to have a friendly conversation with a stranger in any other way. Like the most likely way I'm going to just meet someone and be able to have a heart-to-heart about politics is games, because we're already imagining stuff. We're letting our walls down. We're being vulnerable. So we might be a little more open to hearing each other. Whereas I think if I'm grocery shopping, or if I'm at the bar, I'm at a restaurant, even if I have a nice conversation with someone, it's a little less likely I'm going to get deep that quickly. And I think games, because you create distance, you have an avatar often you're playing as, you're able to talk about deeper things. You might have guardrails, safety tools, hopefully in place. So there's a lot there to help enable a good conversation. And that is how, right? That's how you would talk to anyone ever about politics. You have to start with just like, hey, this is my name. This, as you start the call with, what is your background or what is your interest? And usually, as we're talking about with, like Rafi's can speak to this more, but with organizing locally, it's like, what are the things you guys have in common that you want to talk about? So I think games, I've definitely seen that, where people learn from each other and say, hey, have you read this? Hey, did you know this? And it might not have anything to do with what the characters are doing, but that's okay, because we're all in reality, like we're people. We're just talking.
Yeah. And I think the GM's role in this is pretty significant, because like think of something like video games, right? Like it would be cool if all you needed to be radicalized is like play a rad video game and then all of a sudden you're radicalized. That just doesn't happen, right? Like, at least I don't think so. Maybe you see things a little bit differently, but like if that's all we needed to do is like be exposed to something and then change, a lot of things would do that for us, right? But I think like the GM in this particular circumstance has an important role to play, which is kind of like keep pushing, the story, keep meeting players where they're at, maybe pull back, like that kind of dance. I think is an extra effect that you wouldn't get from video games, right? And also like the fact that you're like in community with people. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I would probably buy into the idea that people are a lot more influential than communication directly with people is probably a lot more influential than just experiencing something solo. Not to say that you couldn't have some kind of awakening from doing a lot of reading, or I suppose playing video games. It seems less likely video games to me for some reason, but yeah, I like it. I like the fact that I've always liked the fact that TTRPGs are social events, right? For people, oftentimes for people who are not that social to begin with. So
Yeah,
Okay.
it goes a bit with the what's it called? Sort of like I don't know if it's the nature of fun, but what I think that makes games fun in a way is the fact that they are anathema to a lot of the more coercive aspects of our society. Like when you're outside, like in the real world, you are entangled in a bunch of like rules that are very unclear. That all of them are coercive. Anything you break basically lands you on jail. You're meeting people that you don't want to meet with and doing stuff that you don't want to do. And once you step into games, you are doing so, first of all, willfully. You're stepping into a space with people that you want to see, hopefully. And you're operating by rules that everyone agreed upon. So it's so radically different from the more coercive aspects of, daily life under, states and shit like that, that it naturally makes people think creatively about, okay, what are the rules that we're going to make up? What are the ways in which we're going to interact? It is really a sort of like laboratory for social institutions. Yeah, of course, in there, like, I guess Graver has done the comparison between TTRPG players and, affinity groups, like direct action terms and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of potential, and I think the influence and the dialogue between people in terms of like political ideas is inevitable. You can't really stop it.
And Fede, you mentioned social science. I also think games are weirdly like they're little anthropology or sociology classes because they talk about types of people and classes. And this was an aha moment for me. I'd been making still fleet image blister critters, and then I was working with my buddy Chris on their game Danse Macabre, and we were talking about actual social classes as the classes in a medieval setting. So medieval zombie game, and it's like the peasant or the scholar, meaning you're coming from the minor nobility, right? You're rich enough to go to basically college, to church, but you're not really a noble. You can't play as a noble. They're the bad guys, and so the idea of the social classes being the class, I was like, that's such a simple, stupid, realization that's where that comes from. But I was like, wow, as an anthropologist, I've been playing these games. I love them both so much. Why? Oh, because they're the same. They're about understanding people and cultures and having conversations about it. So I think to your point, you can't avoid that to some degree because someone says, okay, how does your RPG work? You have to describe a world. And as soon as you're describing a world, you're describing its politics, its material basis, and where do you fit within that? And you begin thinking, okay, I like that, I don't like that. I'm going to work with this person, and I'm going to do this. So, I love it.
All right, let's take another question, shall we? We talked about things that we find regressive. So, as sort of a corollary to that, are there things that you would like to see more out of today's game designers? Whether they're independent, whether they're the big guys, whether no matter what size they are, what trends would we like to sort of invoke, or have we? I think we may have already sort of hinted at a few of those, but what do you think?
Yeah. I think one of the issues that I have with current design trends is that because of the sort of like omnipresence of violence as a means to everything, there's been this thing where, of course, you can't say that all TTRPGs are about violence. You take a look at like games like Alice is Missing or Dial, Dread, or whatever. So of course, yeah, these games aren't balanced, but I think there is something to be said about the fact that so many of the games that or almost all the games that are not specifically about violence are rules light. I think that says a lot about what I was saying before about the incapability or maybe the lack of attempts to deeply mechanize parts of the human experience that are not about killing each other.
Sure.
The fact that if we're going to build mechanical complexity in a way that supports not only long form play, but also building entire identities on mechanical building blocks, etc., it can only be through combat. If we want to do something that's non-combat, it's going to be very rules light. It's going to be a one-shot thing. You can have experimental stuff and shit, but it's going to be quite simple mechanically. And I want to see the crunch behind games that are not about violence. That's something I really would love to see.
Yeah, it makes me think of the insane crunch of Paranoia, which is weirdly almost never really about violence because you're so bad at everything. So you're a subject of violence, but it's very hard to do a violence in that game. So I think that's it's a satire of it's a reaction to some of the same things we're criticizing from an earlier moment in time. But it's funny to think about what would it look like to crunchify a future world more along those lines. So there are lots of skills and stuff, but it's just, why would you be doing violence all the time? What's wrong with you? What else could you build? Yeah. And again, maybe Nibiru 2 is going to be, a little bit of a glimpse into that.
And I think the thing that we often see people trying to mechanize a little bit more, or at least I've seen it with a few different games, is social interactions, right? That would be the main other thing. But there's probably other things besides that we could look at. One thing that I'd like to see personally is if we're talking about big developers, I'd like to see them get out of their comfort zone a little bit more and to hire on more diverse people, tell different kinds of stories. If we're going to have big developers, that's what I'd like to see from them. And hopefully that would not end up with them being sort of having their voices, what do I want to say, exploited. I suppose that's always a danger of that. But I don't know. It seems like
co-opted, don't be
co-opted.
That's
Co-opted. That's what I was
nice.
looking for. Yes, exactly. I mean, that's always a danger of that. But I guess I'd like to see them try.
That's been the trend, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they ended up doing way more harm than good. That's for sure. Mainly because the intent is we just need some diversity, but real commitment always comes when you lose some sort of power. There's no way around it. Okay, otherwise it's fake commitment. Like a good commitment, a good activism, revolution, good allyship, you are gonna end up having to lose some of that, give up some of that power so someone else can step up. That's how it works. There's no way around it. Otherwise it's fake. Otherwise it's hey, we let you sit at the table, but you actually cannot make any decisions. Okay, how great is that? That sucks. You know what I'm saying? So it's if you are truly being an ally, if you really want to invest in people, you really got to give them a little bit more than just a seat at the table, right? They got to have some power to actually make decisions and push things forward and whatnot. So that's one thing I would like to see. Not bullshitting, lose some power, step down so other people can step up. But
You convinced me.
I think for me it's just I want to see more. I want to see less of the same history repeated over and over again. Less Western things. I want to see more. There's this game I really love called Quilombo. It's made by incredibly talented Brazilian designer. It's a whole cyberpunk in the favelas in Brazil. And it's just so rich and beautiful and decolonial and all of that. So step up of the normalcy, get fucking weird, wear your culture on your sleeve with your games. Don't be afraid of going in weird places with that. And I would love those games to actually get more traction than what they do, and get more appreciation. And I think that's not an easy fix. Obviously, we need a culture shift, right? There's just no way around it, because like you can have this game featured on like the most successful YouTube channel TTRPG in the world, and people still are not going to appreciate it unless we have a culture shift in general in the TTRPG community to be able to actually like appreciate the game, right, and understand and respect the game and want to play the game. So it's fucking sucks, but slowly but surely, it's annoying. Like culture shift takes time. But I think the more of us continue to push things out there, continue being vocal about it, that's how you create that culture shift that I think we very much need.
Yeah.
Okay.
I build on that I think we can, some of the things we can do, especially as allies who are trying to help, look at other places on Earth, other stories, is obviously as a publisher, to the point, Syzer, you made about like hiring, like recruiting a more diverse array of storytellers, but also I think return to the material, like going back to like literally what is true about the world and how does that link to our experience as players before we even get to the level of character. And so the characters aren't all, to me, this kind of, I feel like there's like two directions in games. There's this return to the material through like story games and journaling, but I also hope, because I like adventure games, through certain adventure games like ours. And then I think there's people doing this kind of JRPG flattening of everything is super fantastic. And people keep talking about Cozy and Miyazaki. And I'm like, what do you really mean by that? Like, it feels like you're going away from anything with stakes IRL, and you can have all the dragons and orcs you want, but you're moving away from, history and the future and a material analysis and technology. And I think that those are things that are actually the sparks of really gripping stories. And whenever the weird facts, some of which are really hard to grapple with, and you have to decide, how am I going to grapple with this? Am I going to grapple with this in my game? Should I even make this game? But it's like when you read history and, again, we're working on a medieval game, and there's awful shit that happened in medieval times across the world, especially in the context of like, almost you could see the Crusades as like this proto-colonial moment where Western Europe is trying to colonize. They do, for a moment, colonize the Levant. And it's really, really messed up. And I think grappling with that is very different from a sword and sorcery, Gary Gygax, good guys, bad guys. It's like, no, this is much closer to like classed like mercenaries. It's closer to like operatives working for the U.S. government, sort of off the books for the military, going around and doing things. Yep. And it's got a lot of analogs to like the King of France is like sending the equivalent of like sort of Blackwater assassins out to colonize Syria, and you're like, whoa, that's hitting really close to home, in the 2020s. So I think those are things that as a game designer, it's like you can tell stories in that world, or you can be like, no, I'm going to flatten it. It's JRPG, good guys, bad guys. And I think those are trends we're seeing both ramping up, as I think we're moving into a new moment culturally of kind of a new sincerity, or like almost like a Brechtian storytelling moment. People are okay with certain levels of flatness or stockness, but I think they want some level of political engagement. I think they're like we said at the very beginning of the call, it's like people are coming to games with that mind, and I think they know games are somewhat political. So I have some faith that players, regardless of where they are smart enough to know that games can't be pure escapism in the sense of, like doing a drug and zoning out. Like it's a community thing, and it's a thing where you're modeling worlds. So already you're doing a politics, I don't know. I'll stop rambling. But.
Picking up from something that like Rafi had said, like for example, I think like straight up, people need to give money to like, for example, the folks that are making Quilombo and shit like that. Because the big publishers, their intentions for bringing in, more diverse people into their roster for these one-off projects, it's always whitewashing. And it's always sort of like trying to cozy up to the liberal imaginary of like what a diverse society is or whatever. It's and it's been historical. Like we've seen what Wizards did with people like Orion D. Black. We've seen like projects like Radiant Citadel, which like was held by U.S. military IDF collaborationists and shit like that. It's all. It's all like that, and I've sat at the table with people because I used to work in corporate games, and I've seen the way they speak about like the time when they feel like they have to hire a consultant from, I don't know, the Navajo Nation or something like that, and the way they regard that, it's really not great, because they never had the intention in the first place. They're not making games for the same reasons we are making games. I think there's a very big sort of like age gap in a way also, in terms of how games are conceived. A lot of the people that belong to more traditional companies, they're coming from a background by which I think games were much more marginalized as like a thing that shaped identity. So their goal is mainly be like, look at me now, Dad, I can actually make money off of this shit. Not really, not really about like, you know, conveying politics or making something revolutionary, but being like, hey, look, I can make millions of dollars off of tabletop RPGs. So a lot of those people from like the, you know, that are maybe like in their 50s, 60s, that are not like leading big companies, are kind of like in that sort of like state. They're not looking to amplify anyone's marginalized voice or anything. So I think, and you know, it's one of those things that if you are like an independent creator or something like that, I don't see many independent creators reaching out for the ideal of working at corpo or at a corporate funded project. Most of the independent artists I see, they want to be able to, you know, earn a living doing their own projects. They want to take their OCs and make a living out of that, or make their own games and make a living out of that. And I think it's kind of like what we, the way I at least regard the whole idea of like, I would like to see corporate people hiring more marginalized people. I don't know. I think the real goal is sort of like giving money to those marginal people in the first place, and they doing their own shit.
Yeah, sometimes you have an unexamined idea that you just need to say out loud, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. How about this? I think we've been talking for a little bit. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to talk about to the group or anything? If not, that's okay. You know, but if you got a claim you'd like to make or something that you wanted to talk about with the people that are here, might be a good opportunity.
I think we should do more of this. I think this is good. The people on this call, Lori O'Connell, who suggested, you know, maybe you could join us, and I think was under the weather, and many other creators. We shouted out some cool games, and I think it's important to shout out, you know, each other's work, other creators who are doing positive work, experimental work, leftist work. And I think to your point, I really agree, Fede. I don't think we're necessarily trying to recreate Wizards' Paizo world, and we're not necessarily trying to get jobs there. Although, whatever, you know, I guess let's see. I don't think they're going to offer us jobs, but if they did offer you a job, I think that'd be interesting. Yeah. But I think it's important to have our own networks of belonging and affinity, and being able to share ideas and learn from each other. And sometimes it can feel lonely if you're a smaller, you know, creator, smaller scale business, whatever, to feel like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing it right? And to just hear new ideas. So thanks, Syzer, for, you know, having this panel.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. Do Rafi or Fede, do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners today?
I think I think it's just kind of like maybe a hopeful message, because I kept thinking just now just about so many of the barriers that I've encountered into, you know, making this game a reality, and all the hoops that I had to jump and continue to have to jump through to be able to, you know, get my ideas out there and get people to like care and like appreciate and whatnot. And you know, there's just so much. It's not just like you are a talented person, you know how to write, you know how to do art. It's like the whole business side of things, you know, like it's just, I mean, we live in a capitalist world. It fucking sucks. So I think what I want to say is just like, if you're doing your project and and you're finding yourself, I don't know, stuck, feeling like you don't have community, like keep showing up, keep connecting. I always like reply to people, like when people reach out to me and want to know, hey, what did you do to be able to do X, Y, and Z? Like I try to reply to everybody that gets in touch with me, because I was there, like 6 months ago or a year ago or a year and a half ago. So keep continuing doing what you're doing, and like pay it forward, like do the same kind gesture to other people, because I think we all agree in here, we don't want to join those big folks. So the only way to continue to exist in a sustainable way is for us to continue to care for each other and continue to slowly expand our community and carve our own paths, and like hire each other, like or suggest someone else that we can hire, give money to people that we know that need that. So within us, because we can't depend on those folks. So I think that's kind of my closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think probably like if I could give like a good closing thought, maybe is I really dislike the whole aspect of the industry that ties to hiding information on how the sausage is made. Like ever since I remember, I've been publishing like stuff like, for example, well, you know how much like a hardcover book costs? In 2015, 2016, most people in the EU were printing, for example, in Lithuania, and you could get like a minimum offset print that would cost like, I don't know, $7 for a hardcover US letter format book. And that cost actually goes down exponentially the more you print. So you could go and tell people, hey, the $150 that you paid for the 3 books of D&D, Wizard Space less than $1 for each of those books on manufacturing, or telling that sort of stuff. Like I made a post recently, like a big guide on art commissioning with like sample contracts that you can use for licensing artists, and how to deal and how to sort of like talk to artists, and basics of art, because I think like the industry relies so much on art, but at the same time, art is extremely fetishized. Most people don't know, most industry leaders don't know the difference between concepting and illustrating, don't know maybe what a color palette is, or some shit like that. I think that like circulating information about like how much things cost, what are the processes by which like a book gets made and distributed, and all of that stuff, and giving clarity on that, and numbers a lot of times helps a lot. I don't know. I for example, I've had to do like a big distribution list of like both distributors and like a list on outreach to promote my game. And I think 95% of the people that are doing like YouTube, TikTok content for TTRPGs, if you want to talk about your game, are talking either about D&D or to a much lesser degree OSR games. And then the 5% that's left, 3% are talking about solo games, which are a big thing now, and it sort of like reflects the sort of like encroaching atomization of society, I guess. And then there's the remaining 2% where everything else fits. So that's the sort of like hostile environment, and those are like some numbers that I'm trying to talk about, and I would hope more people talk about when we sort of like paint a picture of what the industry looks like.
I was really surprised when you sent me those numbers about what it costs to like actually produce a book, because I was pretty far removed from in my thought processes about how that worked. So that was good information.
Yeah, there's actually interesting. Sorry if I go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Longer. I hope it's not a problem. There was a very interesting, like it was very interesting to see the process by which like book games got made as it evolved real time from 2015 when I joined the industry. on like back then you had the golden era of Kickstarter. You could chuck anything to Kickstarter and it would make 6 figures or some shit like that. And seeing publishers do like these huge Kickstarters that would fund an entire like game line, and then people like those Kickstarters would take years to fulfill. So the culture was like, we don't like this, let's make smaller Kickstarters. And then you see publishers switching and starting to do IP stuff. And you realize that they start doing IP stuff because some of the biggest manufacturing costs of the book is art. And if you do IPs, you're basically getting a bunch of assets made for you that you don't have to pay for, as well as getting the audience from those IPs. Again, it's a really like it's a riveting thing to talk about. But there's so much in terms of like numbers and talking about how the sausage gets made. That I think should be talked about more openly. But yeah, it's
maybe a future panel idea, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone wants to talk about industry stuff, I think we'd all be happy to chat. And we have a lot of people on Why We Roll as well. I know, Syzer, you have folks on your show as well to talk about indie RPG specifically. So these kinds of, how do you do X? How did I solve the problem of Y? Because as you're saying, Fede, there's a lot of knowledge to acquire. Some of it, I think, is not even lack of willingness to share. It's like literally, there's just so much to do. So it's almost easier from my perspective if you just reach out and you're like, hey man, I have a question.
That would be a good one to stream probably, because then you could take some live questions from people who, people who are looking to do these kinds of things. So
yeah, but I agree. The gatekeeping is real though, and we don't need gatekeeping anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up then. So this has been Round the Table. So please like, comment, and subscribe to help us grow so that we can keep on bringing you interesting panels like today's. Thank you once again to all of my fabulous guests, or whatever that means, for taking the time to come hang out and share your expertise today. And this has been I thought it was going to be good. It's been way better than I thought. So I really appreciate all of you coming here today. And thank you, dear listener. Have a great winter, and we will see you on the next one. Bye.